Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to be painting the final Space Marine in the 5 paint challenge series, and this is going to be slightly different than normal and a bit of an experiment. But first, let me say a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed and helped me reach 1,000 subscribers. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you all. It's been amazing to see how the channel has grown, and I've only been able to do it thanks to every single one of you. So thank you, and hopefully the channel can continue to grow. Now let's start the season finale for the 5 paint challenge, as I've saved the best of the first founding chapters for last, and see if I can paint the 18th Legion with just 5 paints. So as you can see, I've primed the model white, so this will give us a nice even base coat for the rest of our colours to work off of. Now this model here today, I'll be painting up as a Salamander Space Marine, the final chapter in our 5 paint series. So for the colours I'll be using today are Warp Lightning, Black Templar, White Scar, Avalanche Sunset and Lead Belcher. If you'd like to see how I paint up my Salamanders normally, please click the video here for a guide on how to paint Salamander Space Marines. So to start with, I'm coming in with Warp Lightning. I'm going to take some of this, place it on my dry palette here. This is just so that I can control how much I've got on my brush. Don't need to thin contrast paints down with any water at all. So I'm going to load up my brush. Then I'm going to start applying this evenly all over the Space Marine. Because we primed the model white, this will allow the contrast paint to show over the top. It will work its way into the recesses, give us some nice shading and colour all in one coat. Try and work your way around each panel one at a time so the paint doesn't start to dry and you don't get tide marks across the model. Now unfortunately, contrast paints aren't the best over smooth surfaces, so Space Marines can often end up looking a little bit blotchy when using contrast paints. Work your way around the model, apply some Warp Lightning all over the power armour, into all of the recesses to ensure we get a nice smooth, even coverage of Warp Lightning contrast paint all over the power armour. Now I'm going to try and avoid any areas that I'm going to paint other colours, because the only other contrast paint is black. It's not the end of the world if we get some of this onto areas where we do want to be black, because it should still cover over the Warp Lightning paint. But I'm going to try and leave areas here like the undersuit you can see showing through on his leg and the shoulder pads, so that the Black Templar contrast paint can work on those areas later. So just work your way around the model, apply a layer of Warp Lightning contrast paint all over the power armour and let the contrast paint sink into all of the recesses. And after that coat, you can see we do have a few blotchy areas on the power armour, but luckily once we add some other colours, these should look less noticeable. So now with some Black Templar, I'm going to come in and paint all the areas that I want to be black. So that's going to be all over the weapons, even areas that I'm going to paint silver. I'm going to catch this with some Black Templar contrast paint, because the darker colour tends to make metallics look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to catch all of the bolter and the casing with a layer of Black Templar. I'm also going to catch the chainsword, including the engine. Being really careful when I get around the hands here, I don't want to get this over any of the power armour that we've already painted. But just catch all of the chainsword with some Black Templar contrast paint. I'm also going to catch all of the undersuit, so I'm being really careful when I get around the power armour we've already painted with Warp Lightning. I'm going to make sure I cover all of these ridges of this undersuit with a layer of Black Templar contrast paint, letting it seep into all of those recesses and adding that contrast and highlight for us. I'm also going to paint the belt and any strapping at this stage as well, catching this with a layer of Black Templar. I'm also going to catch the shoulder pads, because on salamanders, the shoulders to his pauldrons are black. Also going to be really careful around the warp lightning we've already painted. And I'm going to paint all over the backpack as well. So by the end of this step, there should be no white primer showing through anywhere on the model now. It should all be coated with either warp lightning or Black Templar. And once that Black Templar is applied, you can see we've picked out all of those dark areas. It's really added some interest to the undersuit of the Space Marine. So now with some Avalanche Sunset, I'm going to come in, I'm going to put some of this onto my palette and thin it down with just a little bit of water so it runs nice and smoothly off of my brush. I'm using a wet palette here, but you can still use a dry palette if you wish. For this, I'm going to pick out the Aquila on his chest, being nice and careful around the power armor. You don't want to get any of this over the air as we paint with Warp Lightning. This might take a couple of layers to build up to a solid colour. I'm just going to pick out all of the Aquila with some Avalanche Sunset. And I'm also going to place this into his eye lenses as well, because salamanders have yellow lenses on their helmets. And with that Avalanche Sunset applied, there's only one more base colour left to apply. So now with some lead belcher, I'm going to come in and paint all of the metallic areas on the model. So it's going to be things here on his gun, like his magazine, and all of the details at the back and the muzzle. Going to catch all of these with a coat of lead belcher. It's also going to be the engine on his chainsword and the teeth as well. I'm going to make sure I cover all of this with a nice smooth layer of lead belcher. And finally, any of these details here on the backpack, like the vents, I'm just going to catch these with some lead belcher as well. And with all of those base coats applied, the next step will be to shade the model. So for shading, I'm coming in with some Black Templar contrast paint again. I'm going to put this on my palette, and I'm really going to thin this down with a lot of water. Really want to make the paint really run really smoothly, really water it down so it will seep into all of the recesses, but not be as stark as if we were using pure contrast paint. So with this, I'm going to paint this all over all of the metallic details, letting it sink into all of the recesses. You can see we've watered it down. It's really lost some of its strength. So it will now just find its way into the recesses and darken those areas down. To make sure you catch all the areas we painted with lead belcher. And I'm also going to apply it over the Aquila as well, just to add some definition to the Aquila on his chest. If you're enjoying the video, please press like.
If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
And after that shade has dried, you can see it's added some definition to those areas of the model. So now with some Warp Lightning and White Scar, in about a 50-50 mix, I'm going to mix these two colours together. So to start off with, I just apply a little bit of Warp Lightning onto my palette, mix it into some White Scar, till I get a colour that I'm happy with. I think this one's a little bit too light, so I can wash my brush off, another brushed load of Warp Lightning, just until I get a shade that will look nice for a highlight. It ends up being about a 50-50 mix between the two colours. And now I'm going to edge highlight all of the areas of the model. You don't have to do this step because the contrast paint does make its own highlight where it pulls away from the edges, but I want just to brighten this up a bit more and tie it into the rest of the models in this 5 paint challenge series. So I'm just working my way around the edge of the model, picking out all of these edges with a real thin line of this mix that we've made. Unfortunately, this is where I discovered that contrast paint and regular paint don't mix very well, and often the paint would end up separating, so I have to keep mixing it together on my palette. So just work your way around the model and give a thin edge highlight of every panel, a little bit of this mix, if you want. If I was to do this again, I probably wouldn't bother with this step. I think the end result actually made the model look worse, but it was a learning experience that I now know. Don't bother mixing contrast paints and regular paint because the two colours just don't mix. It's also really hard to keep this under control because of how wet it is. It just wants to run away with you while you're painting the model. After that colour has been applied, it has highlighted some of those edges a little bit, but it's also a little bit matte and knocked down some of that shine. So now with a mix of Avalanche Sunset and White Scar, about a 50-50 mix again, taking the two colours, mixing them together on my palette. I'm going to thin them down with just a little bit of water so it runs nice and smoothly off of my brush. I'm going to highlight the Aquila by just catching the most raised points, putting a little bit of this mix like a highlight. I'm also going to catch all of the feathers on the wings of the model, giving these a light highlight with this mix. I'm also sinking a little line of this into the bottom of each of the eye lenses to highlight the eyes. And with the Aquila highlighted, there's only a couple of things left to do to paint this model. So now, with some White Scar, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to put a small spot in the back of each of the eye lenses to add some interest and look like a reflection point. And with the eyes highlighted up, that is all of the details I'm going to paint on this Space Marine. So the only thing left to do now is to tidy up the base. So for this I'm coming back in with Black Templar contrast paint again. I'm going to paint this all over the base of the model. This might take a couple of coats to build up to a solid black colour all over the base. Be nice and careful when you're around the feet. You don't want to get any of this over the green armour that we've painted. Just catch all of the base with a couple of layers of Black Templar. This will be much easier with Abaddon Black. The contrast paint has a habit of running away from you and sinking into any texture on the base. And with that base tidied up, that is how to paint a Salamander Space Marine using just 5 paints. So thank you very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below what else would you like to see me take on in a 5 paint challenge for Series 2? But don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you do want to help out the channel, there is a join button down below. So thank you very much for watching. Please keep an eye out for Season 2 of the 5 paint challenge. And happy painting!